share a PowerPoint screen. And get it into presentation mode. There we go. Welcome everybody to this risk advisory meeting. My name is Lisa Johnson and I'm the Associate Dean for International Study, and I'm here today with Dean for Global Studies, Rebecca Hovey. And the two of us are going to talk to you a little bit about some of the processes that have taken place in order to determine how and where and whether students the college feels comfortable sending students abroad. And then we'll also be able to answer any questions that you might have should they come up. So without further ado, I'm going to move our slides forward and I'll hand it over to Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Hovey. I was picking up a little bit of some back channel noise. I don't know if everyone has their mute button on, but that would help. Anyway, so yes, I want to echo what Lisa has said, that we are so happy to see so many students ready to go abroad in the spring. It was not like that a year ago. And in fact, I think some of you may even be students who had hoped to study abroad this year and postponed your time. Or it's hard to believe it's been a year and a half. So, you know, a lot of the questions that have come up for us is how do we assess the risk of studying abroad? And when we started this process last spring, we were like everybody else trying to figure out something completely unprecedented that we had never dealt with before. Some people describe it as learning to build the plane while you're flying. And since then, we've learned a lot, and we feel really good about our assessment process. I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. So we formed a group last June called the Study Abroad Risk Assessment Advisory Group. And the scope of their work was to determine critical factors and necessary COVID precautions in order to resume study abroad. We did not approve study abroad in the fall of 2020. And then we had only 5 students go in the spring because there were only 2 countries finally that we were able to approve. That was Iceland and South Korea. Some students did what we call study away at home in their home country where they had residence, but that was a little bit different. So next slide, Lisa. So the first thing we did in sort of thinking about this was, you know, and again, because it was so unprecedented, you know, what are our guiding principles? What is most important here? And how do we assess the risk? So obviously, first and foremost, you know, we want to ensure the safety and welfare of you, our staff, our directors, our host community, faculty, anybody associated with study abroad. We also gave a lot of thought to wanting to make sure that the academic program would be a program of excellence, something that would really deliver a solid learning experience for you, because with so many programs pivoting to remote, or even possibly having to execute an early departure, we didn't want to put students in a situation where you would really kind of lose a whole semester due to lack of completion of your academic work or unsatisfactory academic work. And that related to, you know, the third bullet point here of wanting to make sure that, you know, even if it was pivoted to remote or some kind of a hybrid experience, that there was a cultural immersion experience and intercultural learning that was possible, even with COVID restrictions. And then, you know, finally, just, you know, because this is part of the Smith curriculum and the Smith offerings through our office, we wanted to follow the culture of care principles of equity, inclusion, and flexibility. So that was also something that we gave a lot of thought to, and we went through every single program, every single country. It was exhaustive. We probably at that point in the fall, looking at sort of in the spring, looking at this current year, over 85 different programs. Next slide, Lisa. Okay, so what were some of the criteria? Obviously, the first one is, are there going to be delays in either getting passports, or for some countries where you have to get a visa, are there delays in the visa issuance? That was significant last fall because so many consulates were closed. Students couldn't even get appointments. Even now, we're hearing there's struggles with getting appointments to some countries, but it was a much more serious issue last year when we were looking at this. We look at travel restrictions. I mean, that's a really easy, like, "Oh, I think you can go," or "No, you can't." You can't even get into that country. And we still have a few countries. Some of you out there are, I know, hanging on, waiting to see what's going to happen, maybe in Argentina or Japan or um, New Zealand. We really don't know about that. I think Australia may be loosening some restrictions, but that's been, very slow moving out of that phase where there were so many travel restrictions. We look at the Department of State and CDC advisories. This was something that's not only Smith, but all of most US colleges and universities had to really grapple with the Department of State putting a travel advisory level 4 on a country. Traditionally, if it was a level 4, there were really significant issues of risk related to political instability or sometimes natural disasters in a particular country. But now with almost the whole world in a level 3 or 4 because of COVID, with conditions, similar to what we're experiencing in the US, we took a much more subtle approach, and this was supported by most of the major professional associations supporting study abroad as well. The next level down, though, is, a country could even be a level 2 or 3 in terms of COVID risk, but we wanted to make sure that it was a country where there were really strong healthcare facilities and situations in which if you did get sick, even if the risk was moderate or low, that you could get to a hospital. And so some countries where there was a lot of uncertainty about that, and there were one or two that we had to say, I don't know if there was going to be a spike in COVID transmission while a student is there, if the local hospital infrastructure can deal with somebody, even if you're sick with something non-COVID related, right? You could have some kind of a blood disorder or who knows what, but we wanted to make sure that there was really excellent healthcare where we were sending students. Then this is the part where we looked at each program. What is each program saying? What is their contingency plan? Have they thought through the what ifs and how they're going to handle not only kind of the current risk, but if things were to get worse? Number 6. And part of that plan, again, was related to how they would address health and safety. So in particular, for countries that required quarantine, what provisions were in place, or if a student became ill, what kinds of isolation housing or services, would they provide meals, they actually deliver meals to the student or be in contact. Sometimes if you can't get into a hospital when somebody is sick, in some countries, you can't do that if you're not a family member. How could that program help maintain communication with the medical providers while a student is sick? So those, that level of detail were things that we looked at in their health and safety plan. Number 7 relates to some of the guiding principles I just mentioned around academic continuity. We wanted to make sure if for some reason in-person classes couldn't be held, or if a student was in quarantine or isolation, that there would be capacity for remote learning. Or even if you had to be evacuated. I mean, we had all of our students evacuated in the spring, and I would say almost all of them, probably, Lisa, wasn't it? All of them were able to complete their semester because all of those programs just did an immediate pivot like Smith did, and people continued their work from home and, completed an academic semester at home. Number 8 is one that we're becoming a little bit more comfortable with, but we did look at whether there were restrictions on independent travel while you're participating on a program. And the reason for this is that what we were seeing over the past year was that many countries, as they were monitoring their own COVID conditions would all of a sudden, with very little notice, sometimes less than 48 hours notice, close the borders. So for example, let's say you were in Spain and you decided to travel to Germany to visit a friend over a long weekend, and then boom, like all of a sudden Spain decides to close its borders and you wouldn't be able to get back into Spain to finish your program. We did not want students being caught in that kind of a situation. So we also looked at what were their policies and what were they advising students around independent travel while you're on the program. I would say that is still something, though, that is an issue and for you to be paying attention to. And then finally, financial risk, because we have a homeschool fees policy, you know, you pay Smith, your financial aid package travels, and we pay the program. We wanted to make sure that if we were paying deposits and fees, that there was a refund that would be available if for some reason you decided not to go, or we decided not to approve the program, or borders closed at the last minute, that there would be adequate refunds. That actually happened in Denmark, like literally less than 48 hours before the students were about to depart for Denmark. Denmark closed its borders to students. And so we were very, very lucky that we got full refund. And we had like, I don't know, 14 students who were going to go. That was last spring. So we have been through a roller coaster ride here. And I think that we're feeling really good that the programs that we've approved, we have confidence in the providers and the universities that you would be going to. And we've got a really great team here to continue doing the monitoring of all of these different criteria. So I'll pass it back to you, Lisa.
Great, thanks. So also, the other thing that we were considering in terms of making decisions and doing our assessment is what would the experience be like, and what does it really mean to study abroad during a pandemic? And you know, the questions that we were grappling with was, you know, how will we manage uncertainty? Excuse me for a minute. Uncertainty regarding the changing pandemic trends and local health guidelines. What happens if local courses are scheduled to start remotely or switch to remote instruction? You know, how do local public health guidelines differ from those in Massachusetts and Smith campus? We had really robust conversations about this, and, you know, trying to figure out whose guidance do we follow? And most of it, it was determined to follow local policies as much as possible, but also in some areas implementing Smith guidelines and Smith's culture of care as well. We wanted to, you know, we wanted to get a good sense of how isolated the student would be in experience, depending on the situation that they arrived into the country, or if the country were to switch to or have a surge. You know, what would that look like? Because nobody wants to study abroad from their homestay bedroom or their dorm bedroom and stuff like that. So kind of looking at that, and then would the experience meet Smith's vision of a study abroad experience and a meaningful academic and cultural experience and stuff. So these, you know, in addition to the guidelines that Rebecca has referred to and that are guiding principles, these were also the questions that the SAROG team were discussing and grappling with in order to make their decisions. Just a minute, I'm having troubles. There we go. So this is a representation of scenarios that we were anticipating the study abroad students could be going into when they're arriving in their host countries. There could be a scenario that we call least restrictive, where there may be a quarantine or not. That has changed a lot too, especially with vaccinations. You know, that people who are fully vaccinated don't necessarily need to quarantine. Again, that depends on the country. You know, were there curfew restrictions? Was there ability for a multimodal instruction, and then limited independent travel? and then moderately, obviously a little bit more restrictive, and then the most restrictive as well. I think fortunately right now, for the majority of the programs and countries where you're going to, some other countries, it varies, but they're between the least and moderately restrictive. And that's really what we were hoping for to have in terms of, again, feeling enough confident that students would have this meaningful experience while they're abroad. So if you don't know some of these answers to these questions about your study abroad program, I highly recommend that you look for the information about the COVID protocols so that you have an idea of what it's going to be looking like. I can't say specifically for any one program what they are because each program varies, but some programs are restricting travel outside of the country, outside of the host country, others are not, and so on and so forth. Some are implementing curfews, others are not. So it might be a good idea for you to visit the COVID protocol websites of your study abroad programs to find out that information. And as Rebecca said, we know that information exists because it was one of our criteria in terms of assessing the program. So it would be a good exercise for you to find that information for yourself.
I can add to Lisa, sometimes it changes. So we might have
Exactly.
seen some additional points, but
Rebecca, you just went on mute.
Sorry, they may have relaxed it a little bit or maybe made new changes. So
yeah, that's true. That's a good point. It does change, and it's static and only for a certain period of time. So the next level of assessment that we did, Rebecca described, the first broad strokes of what we use to identify certain programs in certain countries. And what we're doing right now, and we have been doing since late August, early September, is on a weekly basis, we are looking at what we're calling the Tripwire Metrics or our COVID metrics. And we're specifically focusing, again, on each of your countries where you're studying abroad, test positivity rate, number of new cases, trend of new cases, and now, fortunately, again, we're getting pretty robust data about vaccination rates and stuff, and kind of using the green, yellow, red criteria in terms of when a country is primarily green and yellow, or again, because the reason we're doing this on a weekly basis, because we know there could be surges or things like that. So a country, as I mentioned, might be primarily green and yellow in these criteria, and all of a sudden we start seeing some reds popping in there. The SAROG community group discusses that and makes decisions accordingly. And we will, if we see some trends going in the wrong direction, more towards the red kind of criteria, we'll send out a note to you, just letting you know that this is what we're seeing. We generally, with the first note, we don't cancel the program. We just tell you that things are not going in the direction we want them to, and that we're monitoring the situation, just so that you have a heads up too. And also, please know, we're grateful that you are trusting Smith with your safety and security for studying abroad. But if at any time you're feeling uncomfortable with the situation or with the information, it's okay to decide for yourself that you don't want to stay abroad. So please don't feel as if you are obligated to do so if you or your family are not. So I point that out because it can go both ways. There could be a point where Smith is like, we're not feeling this is a good thing to be doing, and we might need to pull approval. But at the same time, you too have that agency to make those decisions accordingly and stuff. Rebecca is going to talk about the waiver that you all received in your approval notification.
right. So I know that, this is one of those documents that people say, oh my gosh, I have to read the fine print here. And it does really spell out all of the typical, indemnifications and liabilities that we ask people to waive as part of studying abroad. We do this even, without COVID, we would have a typical risk waiver. So this is the addendum to the study abroad acknowledgement. The important thing in this is that we created the links there for the U.S. State Department travel advisory, the CDC warning levels, and also importantly, the link to the U.S. Embassy's COVID-19 updates. So this is an example for France, but each of you would have gotten one for the country that you'll be studying in. And I have found the best place to get information about what's going on in the country is that link of the U.S. Embassy COVID-19 updates. But we really want you to be checking these on a regular basis. The links are live, so they will go to whatever the most recent update is. And just stay informed as much as possible about what's going on and let us know if you have any questions. And, I don't want to go over the whole waiver. You can read that. And if you have questions, certainly be in touch with us. But we just really wanted you to know that this was an important addition that we've had to add to our paperwork, is to make sure that everybody going abroad is fully informed of the risks of COVID-19. So I'll leave it at that. I can answer questions afterward too.
So as Rebecca mentioned, we've had a couple of these meetings now. We had a similar meeting with the students who are currently abroad, who are abroad for fall semester in the academic year. And we had a similar meeting for the students who studied abroad during spring 2021. And so we're anticipating some of your questions that you might have. One of which will if you are moving forward with your study abroad plans and you have some of those out-of-pocket expenses that you need to pay for, knowing that at some point Smith or you might decide to not continue with the study abroad process, what if anything will you be reimbursed for? And so we will, if you have to pay for a visa fee, we will reimburse you for that. And we will provide up to $300 to cover a change or cancellation fee. So as you're considering your airfare and purchasing airfare, please try to purchase airfare that is as flexible as possible, and that has a relatively low, if any, change or cancellation fee. We recognize that those airfares are probably going to be a little bit more expensive, but at the end of the day, it's much more beneficial to purchase that slightly more expensive airfare with these cancellation and low cancellation or change fees and stuff. And so that's what we're recommending. For the Smith students who are on this call, I know we have some guest students here too, so welcome to this presentation. But for your Smith students, please do plan to register for your classes in spring 2021, or excuse me, spring 2022. And what will happen behind the scenes is that once right before you go abroad, and we have a very good sense that you are going to be able to study abroad, I will work with the registrar's office to get you removed from those courses that you've registered for. So we want you to remain in housing. So don't, notify the housing office that you won't be needing your room for spring semester, and then definitely be registering for your classes now in November during registration period, so that you are you are able to pivot back to Smith should study abroad not be an option. Right? And then just a note, it's stating the obvious, but just in compliance with the college's culture of care, all students studying abroad will be required to be fully vaccinated prior to departure. My assumption is that you're here on this call that you're already complying with that. So thank you for that. And that's it in a nutshell. So I am going to stop sharing our screen now and open it up for questions. You can put your questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, unmute your microphone, etc.
Or use the raising your hand prompt too. That makes it easy for us to see if you have a question.
Sure, Chloe.
I know.
And then Rowan, I see Rowan and then Chloe. So Chloe, you first.
On the COVID, the form, I know that our signature needs to be, whatchamacallit? We need someone else to sign to make sure that we signed it. Does it matter who that is?
No. So the witnessing, the question is about
Yeah.
on the approval or participation form and the COVID waiver. If it's calling for a witness, that could be anybody. So it could be a friend, it could be a family member. Sometimes family members witness each other. So it does not need to be a formal, like a notary public or anything like that. Yeah. Rowan?
Yeah, I have two questions. My first is, how are we going to know if our program is processing the visa for us? And then my other question is, how do we know if we are supposed to be buying our own airline ticket or if the program also does that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That information should be on your program's website. There
Okay.
should be information about, visa processes and what the program does and what the students are responsible for. And the same goes for airfare, purchasing airfare and stuff. So if you can't find that information, let me know and I can help you find it for you. But try to take a first stab at it. It should be published on the study abroad websites of your programs.
Okay.
And Lisa, do you want to mention the travel stipends for some students?
Sure.
The airfare stipends.
Okay. So what Dean Hovey is talking about is for students who receive financial aid, Smith students who receive financial aid, you will be eligible for an airfare stipend, which will come to you automatically. You do not need to apply for it. And it's meant to help offset the expense of your airfare. With that said, you should try to plan to purchase your airfare sooner rather than later. So again, you can get a good rate for it because the airfare stipend is not going to be dispersed to you until probably late November. And the reason for that is we need to get everybody confirmed and figure out who's going where and so on and so forth. Also, just a caveat, airfare stipends are not available for students who are studying in the UK. Or Ireland. So keep that in mind as you're creating your budgets. We got a couple questions in the chat here. Can you stay on campus for J term? That's a question for the housing office. I don't have that authority to say yes or no. So I would recommend that you direct that to the housing office. What's the amount possible for okay, your airfare stipend, how much is it going to be? It's going to be proportional to the amount of financial aid that you receive from the college. So the common example that I give is if you receive financial aid from the college, it's about 50% of the tuition, room and board fees at Smith, then your airfare stipend is going to be about 50% of a round trip ticket to and from your study abroad destination and stuff. So I just looked recently for round trip tickets to Paris. They're running about $800. So with this example, your airfare stipend would be about $400. And the question is, why? Oh no, sorry. To purchase a ticket before receiving the stipend, that would be my recommendation, if you can, and stuff, because the later that you receive the later you purchase your ticket, the more expensive it's going to be and stuff. And with that said, I would not recommend purchasing your ticket until you've been accepted to your program and stuff. And for those of you who perhaps applied for and were approved for 2 different programs and you're deciding which one to go on, make sure that you pick the one and that you've applied for acceptance directly to those programs. There's a question about why the study abroad in the UK is not accepted for the airfare stipend. This is a really good question. We get it quite often. The decision was made quite some time ago to not offer airfare stipends to students studying in English-speaking countries. And the intent was to encourage students to study abroad in non-English speaking countries and improving their foreign language skills. I know that another common question that's coming up too, for those of you who have perhaps recently just applied for your study abroad programs and you're waiting for your acceptance, and it's possible that that acceptance won't come by next week's confirmation deadline. What you should plan to do is complete all of the sections of the post-acceptance part of your application and sites, except for the acceptance notification. So leave that blank, and that will tell us that you do intend to study abroad and that you're just waiting for your acceptance notification to come in. Okay. There's a question about visa processes and the length of time it takes. That depends on the country and the requirements. They can, on average, I would guess they range between 6 and 8 weeks, the process. But again, it depends on the country and what the requirements are. Some countries, there may not be a visa requirement either. I know, for example, students going to Germany, if you have a US passport, you do not need to apply for a visa prior to starting your semester in Germany, for example. So,
Yeah. Or at least US students.
That's what I said, if you have US passports, right? So you should check with your study abroad program and ask about the visa processes. They should be providing you information on that. Questions about if they've decided to, if you apply for 2 programs, you decided not to do one, is there anything you need to do? Nope. We will assume that if you submit your confirmation materials for one of your 2 programs, that you're planning to not go on the other one and will withdraw it. So all you need to do is just confirm with us, our insights, which ones you are going to be going on, and then we'll take it from there. Another question is there a way to postpone study abroad? That's actually a really good question. And I think it's something that all of you should keep in your back pocket, again, given the uncertainty of the global pandemic. And again, I want to reassure you, the uncertainty of the global pandemic is still exists, it's there, but it's far less uncertain than what it was this time last year. So again, because of the due diligence that the SARAG team has done and that Smith has done to carefully consider studying abroad and supporting study abroad, we're assuming, unless there's some trend or some surge that we don't know is even coming yet, I think your chances of studying abroad are pretty good. With that said, again, you don't feel like you have to study abroad, and you can choose not to study abroad as well. If either of those 2 situations occur, Smith decides it's not okay to study abroad, or you decide it's not okay to study abroad, you can reapply for study abroad approval for the next academic year, for fall 2022 or fall 2023. You would have to submit a new application because our online application system does not allow us to roll over applications from one academic year to another. So you would have to start and submit a new application. Just as with last year, those application deadlines, for the most part, are in February of 2022. So Siobhan, you have a question here about, and maybe Rebecca, you can take this question on, that study abroad isn't allowed in levels that are 3 or 4 as per our international travel policy, which is correct. So what measures went into the decision to conditionally approve students to countries that are 3 or 4?
So typically we have, well, first of all, we have an international travel policy that says that if a country is at level or 3 or 4, we need to go through a special process to make an exception to run that program or to allow that program. Many times in the past, we have done that for level 3s, but held the line at level 4. So when I was talking before about looking at the State Department travel advisory level, that's what I was referring to, that in the past we would say level 4, no, we just won't run. But with COVID, so much of the world was a level 3 and 4 that we consulted with colleagues and followed guidance issued by a lot of our professional associations that helped kind of distinguish between how many of these international agencies and the State Department are looking at risk overall with COVID, and what is actually political risk or some other risk in a country that can be looked at differently. And there were a couple of countries that we said we would not approve because in looking at the actual language of the travel advisory, the specifics of it, we determined that the political risk was much higher than the COVID risk. So for example, a country was level 4 with the State Department, but level 2 with the CDC. So the CDC is saying the COVID situation is not so bad, but it's all the other factors that are a risk. So we really did take each country one by one and looked in detail at all of the different factors there.
I would also just add too, early on, the SARA group decided to not, as what Rebecca said, to not use the switch on, switch off criteria. Other peer schools made that determination. They said, if it's level 4, no one's going anywhere and stuff. And Smith, because Smith values the importance of the study abroad experience and, would really like to support students studying abroad, the SARA group made a decision early on when it started meeting that we would definitely be looking at the State Department's travel advisory and the CDC travel advisory, but it was not going to be the only criteria that would be considered in the decision-making process. So that was a specific decision that the group made in order to try to support students studying abroad.
And if any of you have parents who are asking these questions, because certainly I would as a parent, like, how do you know? Look what it's saying here on the website. I'm happy to share some of the letters that were issued by our primary association, the Association for International Educators, and also the Forum on Education Abroad had submitted kind of guidance on how to handle some of these advisories.
I think that my Zoom is acting up and I don't have have access to the chat any longer. Are there any more questions in the chat?
I have a comment, Lisa, that also to share with everyone. I think, even pre-COVID, every now and then we would get a student who would arrive in country and just like, this isn't for me. I don't feel comfortable, or I'm not ready for this. That's okay. Sometimes you don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know, and you'll get there and all of a sudden it's not what you had intended. If you are on a program that starts before Smith College starts, or even like, a few days into the start of Smith College, it is possible to say, I'm coming home. I want to go back to Smith. This isn't working out for me. The sooner you do it, the better, because you may have to be responsible for some degree of what we call non-recoverable costs, which might be some housing costs or some other expenses, but we don't want anybody to arrive and feel uncomfortable. And so certainly, if that's anything that any of you are feeling and it's still, within time to come back in the spring, that's okay. Right? This is a brave new world out there. We're all figuring it out ourselves, and there's no right or wrong. The important thing is that you make progress with your academic work, and hopefully this will work for all of you. But trust how you feel and stay in touch with us so that you get the support that you need in making this decision. I'm going to Italy myself in November, so I'm putting myself out there in the airports, on the airplane. We have some students in Florence, and I'm feeling good about it, actually. I feel like the vaccinations that are required to get in country and, to go to restaurants and get on public transportation, that it will be okay. No more questions. We're very excited for all of you. And for, it's just, this is what we do. Lisa and I have spent our lives working in the field of international education. So it's so great to be able to resume the work and to see what all of you are going to be doing and to hear about your travels when you come back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, thank you again for your time and joining us for this conversation and discussion. If at any point after we sign off, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let us know. You can reach out to me or to Dean Hovey. We're happy to help you talk things through, or whatever it is that you need to feel good about your study abroad experiences. And happy Friday. Enjoy the Friday and the weekend. And just remember, confirmation deadlines are coming up next week. All right. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye.